this podcast.
Hello friends, welcome to episode 0 of the Intu-it podcast. I'm your host Jasmine, and today I kind of just want to introduce myself and also introduce the podcast. So it isn't going to be exactly like other episodes, but hopefully I'll be able to give you some insight on what kind of things you can expect on the pod, and I'll let you in on where I think this podcast is headed at the moment. So I'm Jasmine, obviously. I recently turned 28. I live in Manchester in the UK, but I've lived in around 60 houses across 3 countries and a shitload of cities. So yeah, I've moved around a lot. I've written 2 poetry books and I've done 1 season of another podcast previously too. I live with my partner Dan and our little dog Betty as well. I guess you could say I've always been interested in this stuff. I weirdly, genuinely feel like my whole life has led up to doing this podcast, which I know sounds weird and intense, but it is true. I feel like I was literally born curious. I was born facing up with my eyes open, and my first words were, what's that? Like, what's that? And my first email address when I was like 10 was questions99 at Hotmail. Just don't ask me about that. But I've also just always been curious about consciousness as well, and frustrated, to be honest, by the lack of mainstream study into what that brain do in most scientific communities. I am always astounded by stories of other people's like gut feelings keeping them safe or helping them to succeed, and I am in awe of my own intuitive experiences, precognitive and lucid dreams, like empathy and what that's about, and the power of emotional intelligence as well, the source of my thoughts and feelings, and even more intrigued by what happens as a sort of real magic in our everyday lives.
Sounds interesting.
I got close to killing myself one sad night in 2017. I was at that time being re-traumatized every day by my childhood abuser, and I was basically just at my wit's end. I was lucky enough to be able to access resources to get help, but like a really huge and vital part of my, sorry, don't cringe, healing came down to reading. And I definitely think I'm like a bibliophile, which sounds like a paedophile, but it's not. Don't say that, Jasmine. I'll cut that bit out. Anyway, I love reading, and it has always been like a favorite activity of mine since I was a kid. And I'm lucky because I can read really fast and comfortably fast. And I read during this healing journey, I read at least like 30 books about psychology by renowned doctors, and mainly about trauma, which is a lot about how, with complex trauma, how it impacts the way your brain works. And I was really inspired thinking about the power of neuroplasticity and reworking our subconscious minds. And I thought it was cool that a part of healing child abuse comes down to reparenting yourself, and the theories about internal family systems and how, in a way, your consciousness can be more than one thing at once. I started doing meditation for hours a day. Obviously, I was unemployed while I was so poorly. And I thought it was cool how you become the observer in meditation, again becoming 2 things at once, and in the mind, or in yoga, how you can learn to overcome your instincts to fidget or stop a difficult balancing posture. Like you literally stood there like, oh, don't move. And the whole point is, you learn how to cope in situations that are uncomfortable, but you can deal with it. I found it so cool how Iceman Wim Hof can withstand freezing temperatures for long periods of time with minimal discomfort, and simply using his mind, and how people can lift cars off of children or walk on hot coals. I started reading more and more and more books about the mind, and I was honestly a bit obsessed. I was listening to every TED talk, everything I could find, and honestly I am still obsessed. So please send me books if you want, or tell me recommendations. Anyway, so that's all going on. And then I learned to use actual behavioral changes like reframing and affirmations, which are all to do with your consciousness, along with other mindset work to genuinely start like changing my life, which I know sounds like, woo, change your life, but it's true. And get myself into, safer situations, away from abusive people, and more functioning and like able to work and able to just live happy and feel like a general sense of well-being. And I think that's all come from like figuring out how to work with my conscious, unconscious and subconscious mind. Not saying I'm special because I've been able to do that, just because I've read loads of books about it, been like, right, I've got to do these things which seem weird but feel like they're going to help. And they have helped. And at the time I was also going through some quite spiritual shit from all the meditation and just generally. And I felt like I was getting all these mad signs. And not long after all this, I was gifted a trip to the most well-reviewed psychic in Manchester for my birthday, in which the psychic told me loads of really like uncannily accurate, specific stuff about my life, with zero feeding from me, like zero me telling her anything about me. And also she told me that she basically felt that I had psychic gifts like her, and she was asking me questions like, have you ever had this happen, and blah, blah, blah. And she was basically telling me that I should try and use them, which honestly at the time I was like, what the fuck? And it was kind of spooky. And as a critical person, I was a bit like, okay, am I though? But honestly, like I now, 5 years later, think, yeah, and I'm not embarrassed to say, I think we all are in some way a bit psychic. Like it's not got to be this like, whoa, magic superpower thing, although it is. Do you know what I mean? It's both. I don't know. Like to me, a long time ago, electricity would have been magic. Like it's fucking cool. And in a way, it still fucking is. It's just this mad thing that... Anyway, let me not digress.
Ooh la la.
I've read like a million essays and books by a variety of esteemed psychologists around topics like consciousness, intuition, the noetic sciences, the mind, the soul, and the gut. I've seen some insanely impactful research that I think is actually profound as fuck, and more people need to hear about it. Studies have been done, like successful controlled studies have been done that make a beyond reasonable doubt argument for extrasensory perception and a variety of types of it that a huge number of like Nobel Prize winning scientists support. But why are we not talking about it more? Like, I don't know about you guys, but it's not being talked about enough in the circles I'm in or online or anything, unless you're like kind of willing to go all the way to, very far conspiracies. And this shouldn't be lumped with all that stuff. That's why the way I feel about it, it shouldn't be lumped with all that stuff, because it's not like that. Why is it sneered at to say certain things about like energy just because some LA new age hipsters talk about it as well? The interest of hipsters or whoever doesn't stop people talking about, like, let's say coffee. You just recognize that you are judgmental about those people and the way they enjoy coffee, not about the concept of coffee in general, right? Like, I don't know if it's the best analogy, but look, I am a keen fucking bean about all this stuff. And I really hope to chat and make a community of people, chat with, and make a community of people that are like-minded and want to talk about it with me. So fingers crossed that you are also into it. Wink, wink. So, what is the Intu-it podcast and what is it about? It's a podcast about consciousness where we'll deep dive into studies and critiques around all topics related to consciousness. Of course, the podcast is...
Yeah, we don't want to do anything to scare your children. That's the last thing we want to do. We don't want to scare anybody.
So, what is the Intu-it podcast and what is it about? It's a podcast about consciousness where we'll deep dive into studies and critiques around all topics related to consciousness. Of course, the podcast is called Intu-it, and intuition will be a big part of what we explore. But it's more than that, really. It's asking if love at first sight is a psychic experience and figuring out if we think it exists. It's hearing from twins about the collective consciousness that some twins seem to share. Hearing from mothers about instances of significant mother's intuition that have helped them make sure their child is safe, or anything really. It's asking why certain Survivor players are so much better at somewhat stumbling across immunity idols. It's placebo effects. It's self-fulfilling prophecies, manifestation, mass hysteria, and near-death experiences. It's about hypnotism and dreams and all phenomena related to your mind, body, gut, spirit, whatever it is, connection. I think it's a podcast about connection and entanglement as it is. I think we're all connected in general, and it's going to be kind of philosophical because, buddy, hello, like, that's who I am. The interesting thing to note as a disclaimer going forward, though, is that for some of what we're going to talk about, there is no definitive answer. So we are just speculating. I just need to say that. And some critics say that there can never be an answer without further advances in technology and understanding of these topics, because some people say that the way we can test for them isn't ideal, so it doesn't really work to discover them more. But the thing is, the Institute of Noetic Sciences hold firm that there is plenty of evidence for the existence of psi and extrasensory perception already. And the main thing that we need to do now is the next level of details. So I'm not coming with all the answers. I'm coming with the facts of the research, what people think as a result, what I think, hopefully what you all think, so we can all talk about what we think together, since a lot of the time nobody actually knows. On other things, there are definitive answers, and I'm excited to share the general consensus with you. Like things around the expectation effect. That term was coined by, I think, David Robson in his book of the same name, and I'm sure you've heard the concept that thoughts are things and they have a physical influence over our lives, that your beliefs shape your reality, how our perception is pertinent to our lives and how they play out. Have you ever heard the saying, you're only as old as you feel? Turns out there's actually some biological truth to that. In the 70s, this researcher from Harvard called Ellen Langer did studies on the mind-body connection, like this one where she asked a group of 70 and 80-year-olds to pretend that they were back living in the year 1959, which was 20 years earlier because this study was done in 1979. Here's a quote from Robson's book to explain. Participants were recruited through local newspaper adverts. First, they were given various tests that would normally be used to diagnose age-related problems, and then they were asked to perform a memory test alongside other cognitive tasks, such as finding their way through pencil and paper mazes that were designed to measure the speed of the brain's processing, which is commonly assumed to slow down in age. Fair enough. Langer's team also tested the participants' eyesight and hearing and the flexibility of their joints. So back to me. They then basically did 2 retreats, one where they redecorated everything to seem like a time warp into the 50s, so every single detail, the music, the films, the magazine, all chosen for historical accuracy. Then they asked them to write a biographical piece for that era describing their lives as they were, but in present tense. Living and writing as if it was 1959, just then, and not discussing a single thing that's happened since then. They were encouraged to talk about things that happened earlier in that decade, so in the 50s, as if they were happening at the present time, at the time of the study. So all this with the aim to evoke their younger selves. There was a comparison study done, so another one, where the other participants were put into the same room as the earlier study with the factors like decor, diet, and social contacts remaining the same. But when they wrote the bio, they were told to describe their lives in past tense, like so when it was, rather than the present tense. A small difference, but one in which the participants were focused on their current age, so being in their 70s or 80s. The people in the first group who had immersed themselves in the year of 59 fully saw the greatest improvements from the baseline tests on memory, etc., to the after-retreat tests. It says here in Robson's book, 63% made a significant gain on the cognitive tests. For example, compared to just 44% in the control condition. Their vision became sharper, their joints became more flexible, and their hands more dexterous as some of the inflammation from their arthritis receded. The change was even noticeable in their appearance as their posture improved. They became taller and walked more easily. Langer took photos of the participants before and after the retreat, and observers who were not told about the purpose of the experiment rated the second pictures as looking considerably younger than the first. It was as if she had actually turned the clocks back. So those are some pretty bloody impressive statistics, but I'll read the rest of this quote from the Super Ages section of Robson's book on the expectation effect that will give you a little look into the types of the things we'll be talking about. So he's basically said, as enticing as these findings might seem, Langer's experiment suffered from the same flaws as some of the earlier mindset studies, and indeed much other psychological research from that era. So not just to do with this, but about everything. Most serious was the size of the sample. There were just 8 members in the immersive group and 8 in the control group, which is not typically considered to be large enough to draw general conclusions about the population as a whole. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence after all. And the idea that our mindset could somehow influence our physical aging is as about extraordinary as scientific theories come. Becca Levy at the Yale School of Public Health has been leading the way to provide sufficient evidence to support the astonishing claim. In one of her earliest and most eye-catching papers, she examined data from the Ohio longitudinal study of aging and She examined data from the Ohio longitudinal study of aging and retirement. The founders of the study had selected more than 1,100 participants who had turned 50 by the 1st of July 1975, and then followed their progress over the subsequent decades. So, followed them for a long period of time, right? A big group of people for a long period of time. The participants had also been asked at the study's start to rate their agreement with statements such as, I have as much pep as I did last year. As you get older, you are less useful. And another statement that says, things keep getting worse as I get older. So they obviously had to rate that. Based on the scores, Levy's team divided the participants into 2 groups, those with a positive perception of their own aging and those with a negative self-perception of aging, and examined the risk of mortality in each case. Now this is the mad bit. She found the average person with a more positive attitude to aging lived on for 22.6 years after the study commenced, while the average person with poorer perceptions of aging survived for just 15 years, a difference of around 7.5 years. So 7.5 years. This link remained even when other known risk factors, such as their socioeconomic status or their feelings of loneliness, had been taken into account. So they considered other things as well. The implications of the finding are as remarkable today as they were in 2002 when the study was first published. It says, if a previously unidentified virus was found to diminish life expectancy by over 7 years, considerable effort would be probably devoted to identifying the cause and implementing a remedy, Levy and her team wrote in their paper. In the present case, one of the likely causes is known: societally sanctioned denigration of the aged. Later studies have since reinforced the link between people's expectations and their physical aging, while dismissing some of the more obvious and less interesting explanations. You might think that people's attitudes would reflect their decline rather than contribute to the degeneration, for example. Yet that can't fully explain the most eye-catching results. Levy looked at the Baltimore study of aging, for instance, which had followed the progress of hundreds of people from the late 1950s to the early 21st century. Beginning in 1968, the participants were questioned about their attitudes to old age, such as their level of agreement with the statement, "Old people are helpless." With an average age of 36, it is unlikely that most of these participants would have started to suffer serious age-related disabilities. Their opinions of aging were much more likely to have come from the culture around them than any personal experience. And Levy found that those views could predict their subsequent risk of illness, such as angina, congestive heart failures, myocardial infarctions, dementia and strokes up to 38 years later, even when she controlled for pre-existing factors such as obesity, smoking habits, or a family history of cardiovascular disease. That is mad. You can't tell me that's not mad. You know, I'm feeling personally a whole lot younger now after hearing all that. That is what's so cool about all this stuff, though. Learning about these studies can genuinely change how we live our lives, what we choose to believe, and what we choose to pay attention to. I know that I'm going to spend a whole lot more time looking into amazing older people who achieve, brilliant physical feats to remind myself that old doesn't ever have to mean sick or fragile.
Dude.
So obviously intuition is a big part of what we're going to be discussing. Not the whole thing, but a big part of it. But let's get a bit into that so that we can start somewhere, I guess. So intuition is defined as the ability to understand something instinctively without the need for conscious reasoning. So without the need for conscious reasoning. I think that we should separate the types of intuition to begin with, just because the word can mean a few things. You could, as an intuitive chef, use type 1 thinking in the kitchen. You're making implicit decisions. Even on a new recipe, you're using heuristic and automatic thinking as opposed to what's known as type 2 thinking, which is about reasoning, which is explicit and controlled and systematic. When you Google intuition, the mainstream resources seem to weirdly talk about intuition from the type 2 perspective as if that's the type 1 perspective. The memory and pattern side, the demonstration side, as if it's the same as just using your initiative but quicker. They'll say it like you've got to a new stage of a puzzle that builds on the previous stage. You can work it out intuitively using the information you have received in the prior stage and follow some initiative. They'll say to improve your intuition, you really just need to learn more and work on recalling what you've learned, like knowledge. That's not really what I'm mainly talking about. That's like a different type of brain training, although it does come into it. But if you go back to the it says instinctively understanding without the need for reasoning, as is suggested by the idea that some people try to say that intuition isn't sensory perception at all, which in my humble opinion seems weird. A lot of this discussion is, on the first few clicks of Google articles are about knowledge you already know in the back of your mind. So it says okay, intuition is, you already know stuff and then you quickly draw on that stuff to bring to the forefront of decision making to make good choices. Like you've experienced that sometimes certain cars can be rubbish, so then you intuitively know not to get those cars when you're at a place. It's like, that's not what I'm talking about. And that it kind of bothers me that those are the first articles that come up about intuition, because I kind of feel like that's not the interesting part. That's how they're saying someone can be like an intuitively good chef, though, or an interior designer or an architect or a stylist. They're saying, in a sense, that person has rehearsed a skill that they draw on their experience to make good intuitive choices. All this makes sense, and I do agree that that is a type of intuition, maybe, or just fast processing, but we all know intuition has been used to solve new and novel problems. So I don't understand why some people separate this version of what intuition is, quick memory or pattern-based working out, from reasoning anyway, because I think it's just making reason-style choices based on the database of knowledge you already have is just the same as reasoning, just quicker. So you're doing reasoning either way, whereas intuition is kind of knowing things without any reason whatsoever. I figure if these are the main things on Google. Curious people like me might not be getting the full picture, and it seems different to the kind of intuition I'm referring to. Like the millions of similar cases to this one where, like a young, sweet and well-behaved child of under 3 years old starts to go crazy one morning on the way to the park and refuses to go down a particular residential street for an unexplained reason, despite it being a typical route and no trouble before, and then find out later someone was brutally murdered in broad daylight at the exact time they were trying to go down there, but fortunately they were turned away by the fuss of the child. So you can easily find thousands, millions probably of accounts from people who narrowly avoided danger, and probably yourself you can think of a time where that's happened, where you followed your gut without reason and managed to stay safe. Like, how is it possibly their previous knowledge making reasonable decisions based on what they know in an academic or experiential sense, especially in young children? It's not. How the fuck would a baby know that? Unless we can simply just sense a bit ahead of time. I'm not saying mad amount of time maybe, but just a few seconds ahead, or get a bad vibe about something. Like, some people deny vibes, like, come on. Unless time is so unstable that we can feel it before it comes, how can we know without knowing? Most physicists agree that time is one fucked up son of a bitch. Space-time is super complex, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't get to learn about it, does it? Considering it's potentially the foundation of our entire existence on this weird rock hurtling through space, I think it's only fair that we get to consider all the concepts. In the research I've done, critics or not, everyone agrees that intuition is a good way to make judgments, but also concur that sometimes it fails. Just like anything, I guess. But when we learn more about a subject or an object or an idea, we can help it succeed by knowing as much about it as possible. I bet we're doing a lot more exciting stuff with the power of electricity than we were when we first studied it, aren't we? I think unless we work out more about it, we won't know how to fix the minor errors or spot any signs of trouble within our intuitive systems. I wonder if intuition, like most things, is just imperfect, or if it is always right and we just can't always tell whether we're following it or not. I want to get a lot of guests on to talk about their opinions about this or their experiences about it. I'm not just talking about celebrities, but, if you've got something you want to say, please, shout me out, because I would love to have you on. I want to be able to help give the best insight on how we can follow our own intuition and get that advice from people as well. And if you have any guests in mind, please give me or them a shout and we can try and arrange it, because it's important. Like, conflicting intuitions within yourself or between co-parents or business partners, for example, could be an issue, but it's something that I want to figure out. How do you overcome that issue? Are the answers to these always cognitive biases or illusions? Are all sensory perception has conflicts and illusions, so our hearing and our sight, but there are usually enough common grounds to work from between us, and that they can be trained. So let's figure out on this subject and hear from experts about how to train it. Like, many philosophers have spoken about intuition. In fact, many people from a variety of backgrounds. Everyone knows the top business people are using intuition and gut feelings to make the most decisions. Like Oprah, Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, Einstein, they all claimed intuition is what led them to their successes and the answers to their questions. I'm not as much of a fan of what is known as armchair impressions, like some would consider those from Plato and Locke to be on this subject. I love an experimental philosopher. Studies are really important to me. Even just little ones sometimes, but just a variety of types of studies alongside personal accounts. Like, I'm one of those people that thinks, okay, if a lot of people have said something is the case, even if we have no proper way to prove it, why do we immediately go, oh, that's definitely not true? Like, why would all those people say it? And we are going to get into that, because obviously there is things where lots of people think something and then they're wrong, and that happens. But I want to look into it anyway. I think studies help us control the variables and understand more about a subject. So I love looking into studies and thinking, okay, so what does that mean? And to understand it more and to fully comprehend the vastness of the subject, we're going to break down all of this a hell of a lot more and get into all of this over the course of the podcast. But, for example, we're going to need to look at both conscious psi and unconscious psi to help us investigate the differences and their consequences. For example, an unconscious psi would be when your body reacts without your reasoning mind prior to actual experience. So your skin tingles when something bad is about to happen, but how did you know? Or hair stand up on the back of your neck when you have no reason to believe you're in danger. Those kinds of things are crazy, and there's a lot of studies that have been done about them and what that could mean. So I'm just really excited to get into it with you. My sister Amber is beautiful, she's funny, she's sassy, and she's also non-verbal. She has a disability that means she has no controlled motor skills, so she can't use sign language or pointing to communicate either, basically. Despite this, I feel that we communicate really well. As a child, I always said that we spoke our own language in our heads, but I've always wondered if we really are sending thoughts to each other, or if I'm just well-versed in reading non-verbal communication cues. I kind of go between the two, but I'm keen to explore the topic more. I have experienced what I would consider to be many psychic experiences in my life, but potentially been just too self-cynical or ashamed or worried what people would think to discuss them openly. The thing is, I now realize that those things don't matter, and that the right people will be connecting with me about the experiences we share, regardless of how weird it might be to talk about, because I know I'm not alone in my irrefutable interest in how the fuck our minds work, or how they do shit like precognitive dreaming. Like, aren't dreams actually mad? Aren't they actually mad? Like, why do we just accept and basically ignore it? Like, it's weird and I want to know more. Like, don't you?
Sounds interesting.
We all know about intuition and have had experiences that are a bit weird or hunches that we were right about. It's not a secret, so why do we act like it is? I find myself wondering, does fear of the unknown hold us back? In 2022, the most popular blockbuster movies are always related to sci-fi, and most often superheroes. We are obsessed with humanity's evolution and what might be possible. But research suggests that superpowers may just really be supernormal, as coined in the title of Dean Radin's book on this topic. He's the head of IONS, the Institute of the Noetic Sciences. Like most of the science lovers out there, I'm one of those people that needs to understand the details to process the information and to accept it. I think being open is important though. Our biggest leaps forward and positive changes in the world come from in fields like medicine, science, technology, and education, come from being open to what seems impossible, what feels uncomfortable, and makes us question the foundations upon which we have built our lives as individuals and as a society. It's in this way that we progress and that we learn more about each other and in turn ourselves. We thought we understood everything about the world until we were wrong, and examples of that happen all the time. For example, as recently as the 90s, the general thought among Westerners was that there was only 9 planets. We now expect, through interest in further investigation on these topics, that there are actually billions and billions of planets. What we think we know changes all the time. But if people are interested, there will be money behind studies. And if there's money behind studies, significant controlled research can be done on a mass scale. Research can be spenny. The good news is that a ton of research has already been done on the topics surrounding and relating to intuition. I just don't think it's getting that much spotlight because people don't want to look crazy or out there or new age or hippie. This shit isn't woo-woo, it's studies. I'm going to be talking in this podcast about hundreds of studies, the steps they took, the findings they got, the meta-analysis of the findings, the critiques and the mad things that all came, rolled up into it. I will also in the future be speaking with a whole variety of guests around their experiences with intuition themselves. Ever been sure you just knew something was going to happen right before it did? Ever got the urge to do something unusual or out of the blue and had that moment change your life? Have you ever heard or dreamt of something and then watched it play out in your real life after that? I want to hear from you. Listener stories are so important to me because this is about all of us. On this podcast, I want to investigate and seek to understand and learn about extrasensory perception as a whole. I'm covering all bases. If there's evidence for something mad, then let's check it out. I want us to figure out how to harness any potential strengths of the energy in our brains and bodies to better improve our own lives and maybe, just maybe, make changes in the world we live in. This is a podcast about connections and the entanglements between us all, the conscious spaces that we share as beings on this weird rock hurtling through space. We can figure this shit out. I'm into it. Are you?
Sounds interesting.
Talking about intuition, premonitions, psi, and extrasensory perception may feel uncomfortable, but we will never develop if we never talk about it. And that gives me the feeling that we've been encouraged to mock these subjects for so long, because if we look into them, we might discover more than people would want. Or some people, anyway. The truth is, we already look into them. We kind of culturally already accept a lot of this stuff. We just say, oh, that's so weird, I was just thinking of you, or that's a spooky coincidence, or I had a hunch, or a gut feeling, or say, my spidey senses were tingling. We'll get the urge or be drawn towards or away from a situation for our benefit and not know how. We'll be tugged at somewhere inside, or just something will happen where we just knew, or something told us, or we had a feeling, a vibe, or an energy. This stuff is so central to our well-being and survival, and yet we simultaneously accept and deny these examples of extrasensory perception. I want to switch the narrative on this stuff, and with your help, I want it to become the normal to celebrate and study what it can be done to understand it further. When there's something major happening, I want it to be on the front page news, and it's not. I think we should be central to how we operate, not a passing thing that some people don't even believe in and most of us don't know how to utilize well. I want to speak to experts on all related topics and people that seem to just have a really good gut. I want to dig deep on the importance of our beliefs, our expectations, assumptions, and thoughts on our physical realities and experiences. We could all learn to separate our monkey minds from our intuition and be better, safer, healthier, and more fulfilled for it. It's not all about using these skills to predict, but to better understand what the heck it is that connects us. A lot of the research that's been done already has been done to prove that ESP exists. I want to bring light to the topic so that more research can be done on how it works. If we can get to that bottom of that point, who knows what possibilities that could open up. We recently went through, the Industrial Revolution, then the digital age, and now I think that we can develop technology so much further through researching the how of the power of the conscious and subconscious minds. The thing is, supernatural stuff is truly supernatural. It happens in nature. It seems magical, but it's only as magical as an iPhone would be to a person 100 years ago. What follows here is a quote from Real Magic by Dean Radin that I think perfectly summarizes what I'm looking to further bring light to, study, learn to understand, utilize, and investigate during this podcast, or within this podcast. Real magic falls into 3 categories: mental influence of the physical world, perception of events distance in space and time, and interactions with non-physical entities. The first type I'll call force of will. It's associated with spellcasting and other techniques meant to intentionally influence events or actions. The second is divination. It's associated with practices such as tarot reading and mirror gazing. The third is theurgy, from the Greek meaning of God work. It involves methods for evoking and communicating with spirits. Unlike books that discuss beliefs about magic from psychological or historical perspectives, or that list recipes for spellcasting, the goal here is to explore real magic from an evidence-based scientific perspective. Why a scientific approach? You wouldn't know it by reading most college textbooks, but there is a vast scientific literature that informs our understanding of real magic. When I was in college, none of my coursework mentioned anything about that literature, but now, after 4 decades of experimentally studying magic, motivated by scientific curiosity and without a religious background that might have biased me to be oversympathetic about metaphysical concepts, I've come to 2 conclusions. Firstly, there's no doubt that science is the most accurate lens on reality that humanity has developed so far. What we've collectively discovered about the nature of nature after the last 3 or 4 centuries, from the quantum to the cosmological, is an awe-inspiring testament to our creativity and imagination. Technologies based on that knowledge provide proof that our discoveries are valid. So, when considering real magic, it would be foolish to just throw away what we've already learned. But second, reality viewed through the lens of science is an exceedingly thin slice of the whole shebang. Science is tightly focused on this objective, measurable physical world. That focus excludes the one and only thing you can ever know for sure, your consciousness, that inner spark of sentience that you call me. While science's practice has primarily concentrated on the objective world, scientific methods are extremely powerful. So, if we wish, we can redirect our lens to look inward and explore consciousness and what it's capable of. When we do that, we are startled to find whole new realms of knowledge. One of the consequences of taking this inner perspective is that the idea of magic transforms from an impossible fantasy into an aspect of nature that we can begin to study. From this stance, terms such as paranormal and supernatural are seen as quaint and antediluvian, similar to how modern medicine no longer needs the concept of bad humors when discussing the origins of disease. We'll explore this new realm of knowledge through 2 major themes. First, based on a substantial body of experimental evidence, we can state with high degree of confidence that magic exists. Real magic exists. Secondly, there are rising trends in science suggesting that what was once called magic is poised to evolve into a new scientific discipline, just as medieval astrology and alchemy evolved in today's astronomy and chemistry. The new discipline will be the study of the psychophysical nature of reality, that mysterious interstitial space shimmering between the mind and matter. Understanding how this enigmatic space works in a way that's consistent with the rest of science requires a new worldview, the lens through which we understand reality. From a conventional scientific perspective, widespread practices like prayer, affirmations, or sympathetic magic like wearing symbols are considered examples of infantile magical thinking, fairy tales. Some scientists even use the word magic as a synonym for nonsense, because it implies that the scientifically appalling idea that some things just happen for no discernible or plausible cause. But magic doesn't mean no cause. It just means that we haven't developed scientifically acceptable theories to explain these effects. As we'll see, there are already important hints that may lead to such theories. So it's important to think of real magic not as something impossibly mysterious, but as a forerunner for future science. This is the nitty gritty. I want this podcast to be the way that regular people like me who are interested in this stuff get to discuss and understand and relate to it, and hopefully use it to make our own lives and those of the people around us better, and honestly, as a bonus, just more exciting. I think most of us can agree that some spooky shit is going on. We just don't know who can do it and what can be done and where it can be done and how it's done. Or do we? I used to think if something major happened in the development of these exciting fields, that it would be, headline news. But Henny, it ain't. So that's why I'm here. Here I am in the studio. So extra, read all about it. Sensory perception. I thought that was quite funny. The episodes are going to be varied, some more than others. So it's important to me that we talk about a lot more the normal side of things, but still not widely accepted things, like the expectation effect and how our thoughts and beliefs are central to our experiences and how damaging they can be when we don't really understand the power that they hold, and to learn how to navigate that more successfully and in our best interests. Now, there is compelling controlled evidence for a whole host of consciousness-related content that I want to dig into on this podcast. So I'll give you a little teaser. Let's start with something that we all might relate to. Now, I don't know about you guys, but there's been loads of times in my life where I'm sure I felt someone staring at me, and then I've looked up and someone was staring at me. Do you know what I mean? Have you guys ever had that? And, sometimes it feels like you're being stared at when you're not looking, and the feeling alone is enough to make you turn or awaken or be like, yo, and awkwardly run away, depending on the situation. But this phenomena is something that people have been speaking about for centuries. So its negative connotations, like the evil eye, which we've got to ward off, have become one of our longest held cultural superstitions. We've all seen the amulets and heard about warding them off, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, that the term evil eye comes from a guy called Frederick Thomas Elworthy, who published a book in 1985 with the title The Evil Eye. And in the book, he describes this universal belief, so something that he's saying we all have talked about for centuries. The eyes have some sort of power to emanate force, and he also says that any sort of bad vibes or like the influences of bad vibes could dart from the eyes of an angry person and penetrate and corrupt people's bodies. Sorry, I get so distracted when I say things like penetrate. So essentially, when you give someone evils, you're literally like putting bad intentions into them. So I don't know if it always has to be negative force for it to work, and I'm also not sure if it comes down to the eyes emanating force or more likely like an entangled energy transference, but we'll be getting into all that, won't we? What do you guys think about it? Have you felt like you can definitely give someone evils and burn through their bodies? Let me know. So I guess the question is, if this feeling, this staring sensation, is so widespread through a variety of cultures and years, is it based in fact, or is it just superstition? There's a little quote from Dean Radin's book, Entangled Minds, that I want to read about this. It'll help us to understand the studies that have gone forward about it. So, the sense of being stared at has been experimentally investigated for nearly a century. In the typical study, one person does the staring, let's call him Jack, and another is stared at, let's call her Jill. Jack and Jill sit within a few yards of each other. Jill with her back to Jack, so she's facing away. Jack flips a coin to determine on each successive trial whether he should stare or not stare at the back of Jill's head. If the assignment is to stare, then for 10 seconds, Jack intensely stares at Jill. Then he alerts Jill with a clicking tone to respond yes if she thinks Jack has been staring at her, or no if she thinks he hasn't. Okay, so the interesting thing about this is, though, based on this simple design, Dean Radin, who was the head of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, found 33,357 trials, so loads of examples, across 60 experiments, some under highly controlled conditions and some under more casual to use for a meta-analysis, so where you go across loads of data. And some of the experiments would be done with blindfolds and others in a far distance through a window. So like the difficulty level did change, but I mean, at the end of the day, if you're facing away, you're facing away. Do you know what I mean? So we have loads of examples here, basically. Of course, in any situation, you would statistically expect, if purely by chance, for them to sometimes get it and sometimes not, just randomly 50%, right? The results would be 50% if it was statistically purely by chance. The overall success rate in these experiments, all of them combined, had odds against chance at a staggering 202 octodecillion to 1. So that's an octodecillion, which is 2 times 10 to the power of 59 zeros. So like, I'm quite shit at maths, but let me just make something clear here. There are 6 zeros in a million. So if it was a 1 in a million chance, that'd be one thing. Even that would be like, whoa. Everyone would be like, rah, that barely happens. Obviously, it can happen, but do you know what I mean? It's not that common. But 1 in a 202 octodecillion chance is just something else, right? It's just something else. It's safe to say that there are no coincidences here. This is the kind of result in any field that would definitively rule out coincidence as an explanation. Cool. So obviously there's still going to be criticisms. People are going to be like, well, that sounds dramatic. So the usual ideas come up when faced with something like this. So let's think about them. The different ones are flaws in the experiment or how it was done, fraud, which is obviously people lying, or selective reporting, which is not giving in to all the results, right? These suggestions were tested and found to not provide a plausible explanation. Some minor details could explain a few of the results, but Radin explains that no individual flaw or combination of flaws has been found that can credibly account for the overall results. Collusion, so the fraud part of it, isn't a possible explanation, as many independent groups have recreated and replicated the results themselves. Let me mention one quote here, though, that's about selective reporting. That will be easier to read from the book. Okay, so it says here, selective reporting is a more serious possibility, as many of these studies were conducted by groups in schools, and it's likely if these studies might not have been reported. A funnel plot analysis of these studies indicates that there is indeed a selective reporting problem. There are too few small negative effects in the funnel plot. We'll go over in a mini clip about funnel plots and things like that so that it can be easier to understand if it's not your usual place to think about things. Anyway, so to automatically identify and fill in the missing byte taken out of a funnel plot, statisticians commonly use a technique known as trim and fill. This technique provides a worst case estimate of how many studies appear to be missing from the plot, and it also estimates what effect those missing studies would have on the overall results. Worst case scenario. The trim and fill technique estimates that worst case scenario, 6 studies are probably hidden away in file drawers. That's what they refer to it as, the file drawer problem. When those studies are added to the mix, we find that the overall results are reduced slightly, obviously, but the odds against chance are still astronomically beyond coincidence at 10 to the 46, so 10 with 46 zeros after it, to 1. To completely nullify this outcome, so to make it moot, don't know why I said mute, but you know what I mean, moot, we'd need 1,417 non-significant studies to be hidden away in file drawers. This is almost implausible, so selective reporting cannot explain the results. Analysis of differences in the controls employed in these experiments indicate that studies that didn't rigorously shield against sensory cues ended up with larger effects than studies with better controls. This means some portion of these results might be due to subliminal sensory cues picked up by Jill. Obviously, she is facing away, but maybe there's other ways to kind of tell if he's staring or not. But a subset of the highest security studies, so studies done in controlled labs, still provide abundantly significant outcomes. And so some of the sense of being stared at experiments do appear to involve psi. So yeah, that's the end of that quote. Psi or extrasensory perception seem to be involved with this little element of our lives, and sometimes it can be helpful. It can keep us safe, or maybe get us a date if it's flirty. I don't know. I guess we should all give it a try, and we could ask friends or family to help set it up. And you know, it's exciting to kind of look into the stuff we experience all the time, but have just accepted as normal with no further investigation amongst most of us. You know, like we can figure shit out. I don't know. It's cool. I think with psi, you have to see it to believe it sometimes. So let's try it. Let's see if we believe it. Either way, let's talk about it. Send me messages and voice notes and stories of all your weird experiences. Like, tell me if you've ever been caught staring at someone who's facing away, or ever caught someone staring at you. Let me know.
Dude.
Ooh la la.
You know, it's great that we can use it for things like seeing into the future, but we can also use it just for more day-to-day things that have a big impact on our lives, like improving sleep and food digestion, health, willpower, improving the benefits of medication, improving your worst days and increasing your mental reserves and your capacity for exercise, overcoming biological limits that are often the cultural artifacts of expectation, becoming healthier, happier, more compassionate, more able to overcome roadblocks, to become able to fulfill your potential and find your success and your passion, have harmonious relationships that generally feel good. Like, these are just some of the topics and some of the uses of the topics I want to cover, but I feel like this field is absolutely huge. It has so much untapped potential and topics to discuss. It's exciting as fuck, to be honest. If there's a topic you want me to talk about, though, let me know, and I'd love to hear from you. I'm so into it. You know, I love it. You know, there's going to be a new episode dropping every Wednesday. If the topics seem cool, don't forget to follow or subscribe. If you are also into it, holler back just to chat. Truly yours, your biggest fan. This is Jazz, over on my Instagram at Jasmine Dine, or email me using the details in the show notes. I really want to chat to as many people as possible about their own weird experiences or things they know to be true on the subject of the mind, gut, psychic, soul, life, etc. It's just mind blowing. It's cool. Anyway, love you guys, and I'm excited to be here. Until next time, bye.